Hey, thanks for coming back and joining us for this episode. My name's Eric. I'm your host. And in this series, we're tackling the mission of bridging emotional health and spiritual maturity. And I got my good friend, Pastor Wes Kennedy, here with me today. And we really believe that going to these places, right, for many people, these are like locked doors, right?
Yeah.
But we really believe that going to these places is going to be a path for growth and wholeness
Yes.
for each of us, right? And that's it's what we're really trying to tackle in this is bridging the gap between emotional health and spiritual maturity, but for the purpose of more like Jesus, more complete, more whole,
Yeah.
right? So it's really good. What are we talking about today?
About families.
Familia.
Yeah.
Familia. I have a big family. How many people you
bet
got in
you
your
do.
family?
We're probably pushing 50 when we get all of the cousins together.
No, but what about like you and your siblings? How many?
Oh, 4 siblings, 2 parents, 6.
6. Okay, yeah.
It was fun growing up.
Yeah. I got 5 from my mother and father. My father has some more children. He's got 4 other children, so I'm one of 9.
Wow.
Big familia. Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun, right?
Puts the fun in dysfunction.
Wow. Was that a cheap shot? That was a cheap shot.
No, that was a setup for where we're going.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No, but definitely so. Definitely so. I mean, families are notoriously can look good on the outside, but be completely dysfunctional behind closed doors, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's one of the things we're going to open the door to, right? Is really that families can be broken, right? In fact, what would you say? What would you say that only some families are broken?
No, all families are broken. You know, and you said something right now that families can look good on the outside, but behind closed doors be really dysfunctional. We know this to be true about our individual lives. I mean, we know days when we're just not feeling it, you know, or there's a crisis, but we're just trying to keep it together. We look fine when we go get our coffee or go to the bank or whatever. Take that, multiply that by 2. It happens with couples. You know, you kind of figure out a way to make it look good on the outside, but behind closed doors, there's some real strain on the relationship or conflict in the relationship. And then put that in a family system, and it's exponential. So we all learn ways to kind of look good, but the truth is that there's brokenness, and we can talk about what that means in all families.
Now, when we say broken families, what does that usually, like, if I were to say, oh yeah, so-and-so comes from a broken family, what does that typically mean? And what are we hoping to take like a 2x4 to and just kind of crush that
50 years
idea?
ago, a broken family was kind of a street language for a family in which there was a single parent, usually mom, usually meant a fatherless home.
Yeah. But that's not true, right? That's not the only definition for a broken family.
Yeah, we definitely want to move away from that paradigm for the idea of broken family and just recognize that all families, because we are plagued by brokenness in our own lives,
Yeah.
all families have brokenness in them.
Yeah. So even families where mom and dad are both living in the home, right? All the children are still living in the home. There
Yeah.
can still be brokenness in fact there is brokenness in that family, right? It just may not look the same way or as blatant maybe as per se a fatherless home where there's an obvious absent parent in the picture, right? I think that's super huge to just kind of define. So when we're talking about family, we're talking about everything about family, not just isolating these broken homes that are because of fatherlessness or a mother's absent,
Exactly.
right? Or one of the spouses dies or something like that. You know, single parent families, like that's not just and only what this episode's about. Yeah, there's no perfect families. No perfect. I mean, that to me gives me a lot of grace, I think. It makes me woosah a little bit, right? Because I don't have to be perfect, but it also, you had mentioned it makes you sad as well, right?
It brings humility. So in some ways, it brings freedom to acknowledge certain things in our own history from our family of origin. Just kind of normalizing the issue of brokenness. It's okay to say, hey, there were some patterns that I learned. You know, I love my parents, honor them, or grandparents. but there are certain patterns that I learned or that we developed among the siblings that maybe weren't all that great. It gives freedom to be able to say that. And at this vantage point as parents, it brings about humility, knowing that, we're gonna press into God's design for families, but there are gonna be some things that inadvertently I'm gonna pass on, whether it's attitudes about people, whether it's a way that I respond to certain things that without ever sitting down and teaching my daughter a class, she'll internalize, and that will become her pattern as well. It's brokenness. It's generational cycles. So it brings freedom, brings grace, but also brings humility.
Brings an awareness, like, man, we have some work to do, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the saddest things when I think about family, especially in the context of the church, right? So many times on a Sunday morning, and I may know what's happening behind closed doors just from being a pastor. I was with that family on a Thursday night, and here they are on a Sunday morning. On Sunday, it can be easy to look at a family and think, oh, they got it. They got it together, man. Look at they all come to church together, right? Her husband comes to church with him. I wish my husband came to church with me, right?
Their kids are in youth group. I wish my kids still came to church.
Exactly. And so we get this very false persona that if a family looks good, that they are good. And that's just not true, right? It's just not true. There's a brokenness that we all have to deal with. And I think something that you had mentioned before too is the idea that we need to unlearn and relearn certain things, right?
Yes.
When it comes to family, right? Because there are things that we've caught, right? We've caught from watching our parents, who caught from watching their parents, right?
Yeah.
And there are things that we've just been passing down, right? Because that's the way we've always done it. That's the way we do it. You're a Marquez. This is how we do things, right? And we pass these things down that are actually super dysfunctional, right? And not helpful, and actually don't set people up for success or wholeness or completeness. They actually create hindrances.
Or cause new problems.
Yeah. So talk to me about unlearning and relearning.
Yeah, all of us have lived this to a certain degree. Pete Scazzaro, who was a pastor, wrote about this, has written about this quite a bit, but we are all formed by our families in really important ways at a brain level, which turns into a biological level because our brain and our bodies are connected, which turns into behavior, patterns of the way that we think or respond to all kinds of things that come our way in life. And so there are these patterns that we develop, these attitudes that we develop, even unspoken rules that we learn, values that we have, say about men or women, say about money, say about anything that really we deal with in life. And the process of becoming more like Jesus, becoming whole, right, set apart, holy, is uncovering these things that we have internalized, maybe even just assumed were normal, and holding them up to the light of God, and allowing Him to show us which are just cultural, but aren't from His heart, which are from our family, but aren't from His heart, and eventually we relearn, not so much in a class, but in a lot of different relational ways, experiential ways. By the grace of God, we relearn how to see things, how to value or not value things, how to respond to the same dynamics that we responded to maybe very differently before. So in a lot of ways, it's being sort of deconfigured from what our family built into us, at least the unhealthy stuff. There are many healthy patterns that have come through families, even let's say the most dysfunctional family, there's some strength, on the other side of maybe the worst dysfunction or the thing that turned into something that caused problems. There's a strength on the other side, right? Yeah. So we're not discounting that, but becoming like God in character, becoming like Jesus, becoming whole is very much uncovering what's unhealthy and relearning, being reconfigured. in our brain and in our bodies and in
Yeah.
our responses.
Quick story. Like as you were talking about this, something came up in my mind. My son Danny, right now he's 8 years old, and sometimes uh, I wonder where he gets these notions from. Like I see him behaving a certain way, and I'm like, where did you come up with this? Like, why do you think this?
Mm.
Right? And one time he came to me, he says, Dad, he goes, I just don't feel like I can be perfect. And that was like a light bulb that went off in my head. I was like, something made you think that me and Mom expect you
Mm.
to be perfect. And so it was a really good moment in there where you can be aware, like that's not actually a healthy thought that you're feeling, that you picked it up from somewhere. Like I guess we're doing something wrong, but we can fix it. Like let's address that issue, right? And sometimes I think as individuals or as parents or even as younger people, we come up with these thoughts in our family and we don't even know where we picked that up from, because it wasn't something that was sat down and taught to us as a rule. It was more of something that was caught through inflection or reflection, right? Like it was brought to you. You could just kind of picked it up from observing, and it could be really harmful. And then they don't get addressed, they don't get corrected, they don't get brought into the light and brought next to Scripture and say, no, here's a corrective way of thinking about these things.
Yeah,
right?
you touch on something really important. When we are talking about the fact that there's brokenness in every family, it doesn't mean that we're pointing the finger at every parent.
Right.
In fact, I want to talk to parents and grandparents just for a second. I'm sure that Eric and his wife, Connie, never said, son, you have to be perfect. But he responded to something because of what he has learned to value and the way that he interprets the world. So I want to take the pressure off of parents to feel like you need to be intentional about every single moment. There are going to be some things that your kids, because of the way they're wired, because of what they've learned to value, because of maybe something that happened at school, and now they're like, I never want to feel that way again, and they make their own choices to live a perfect life or whatever it is. They're going to respond to the things that you say or don't say, and it's not on you to be a perfect parent that you have to structure and be intentional with every single second of every day, but it is on us to discover the hearts of our kids and grandkids.
Yeah.
To discover that thing that is there. You didn't intend that to be there. You probably didn't even communicate anything for it to be there. Right. But he's responding to something.
Yeah.
And now
being observant, right? Like, oh, wait a minute. That's not actually a good thought right there. Let's debunk that, right?
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah. You mentioned something too before. You said when it comes to like unlearning and relearning, you said this statement. You said discipleship is being reparented by God. I thought that was a really cool statement. Why don't you unpack that for us? What does that mean? Discipleship is being reparented by God.
Yeah, that works on a number of different levels.
Yeah, it does.
We don't like that because we think we're grown up and we have grown up. We are now the parents or the adults in society or whatever it is. But the truth is there are parts of us that are still holding on to old patterns of responding. Maybe because we were a younger sibling, maybe because we felt shame about something in our lives, maybe because in our family we had to be a parent or had to be an adult because another adult wasn't there. We've learned these ways of responding, and a lot of us are holding on to those, and it may function okay. It might even look pretty good. But if we're really after the heart of God, if we're really after the character of God in our lives, and we're going to allow God to shine his light on any and all patterns.
Yeah.
And
not just the ones that we think are
not just the obvious ones, like, the temper, obviously I dealt with, and I'm pretty open about this even at our location. I had a very, bad temper growing up, and in seventh grade, I specific memories of still acting like an emotional toddler, right? And, as someone in my 30s now, acting like an emotional toddler with anger, that would be an obvious thing. But as you're saying, it's not just that. It's even, some of those secret habits or patterns or attitudes that God really wants to reconfigure in us.
I remember growing up, one of the things that it usually got me in trouble, but I almost felt like it was a superpower, was to be brutally honest. Right?
It's a strength.
Yeah, it's definitely a strength. But I felt like you should be thanking me that I'm telling you the truth, even though it doesn't sound good, right? Like, because
didn't go well.
Because everybody else is gonna lie to you, right? Look at like TV shows like American Idol, where they let somebody go up there knowing they were bad, but someone told them they were good, right? And they went up there and made a fool of themselves, and then they got taught they were brutally humiliated in front of people. And I was like, I'm not gonna do that to you. I'll just tell you right now, you're not good. Like, don't do this, right? But I had to learn, right? At a younger age, I thought, no, that's not wrong. That's not a flaw. That's not something I need to work on. That's a strength. Like, people should appreciate that. But you don't really get a lot of friends when you're like that either, So you learn, oh, you know what? You can tell the truth, but you got to tell the truth in love, right? And what does that look like? And so sometimes when we ask the question, do I need to be reparented? Do I need to be reparented? I'm 40 years old. I got 5 kids. I'm my second grandchild on the way. You're telling me I got to be reparented by God? Yes. That might be hard to hear, but because sometimes the things that we think are actually strengths have some negative consequences that's just not what God desires for his family. It's not what he desires for his children, right? And so you said something, even though it functions and it might look good, it's fragmented at best, right? And that's just not what God desires. His desires, Paul, again, we talked in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, that the God of peace, that he himself will sanctify you, right? Every part of you, your soul, your mind, your spirit, your body, right? That he would sanctify, make holy, make complete, make whole, not fragmented. Yeah. That's not his desire. His desire is complete wholeness and wellness. He wants it to be completed and finished. And so that's huge. So do we need to be reparented? Absolutely.
Yeah. And the best parents will be able to recognize the strength that's gone sideways. So the kid that's yelling is, wow, you're so expressive. Let's learn how to channel that differently. We come up with any number of examples of this, but behind any what we would call misbehavior, there is a strength.
Absolutely.
It's just gone sideways. Yeah. And I think that God as Father does the same thing. If we allow him to, you talked about something that went very sideways.
Yeah.
But is actually a strength and actually came from the way that God has wired you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you think about the way that we're wired, right? This is talking about those who have a new life in Jesus, right? We're born again, and I really want to hone in on that term, born again, because we kind of talked about this in the last episode about attachment.
Oh, yeah.
But attachment, is a big deal. Why don't you first? Let's go there. Why don't you talk to us about what attachments are, and then we can get into this new attachment that we've kind of been talking about lately.
Yeah. I think really the simplest way to think about attachment is the emotional temperature that we've come to be comfortable with. It's the emotional bond that we have with the closest caregiver, usually mom in the first year of our life, but it could be dad as well. And that actually becomes the template for what we expect in relationships, for better or worse.
Yeah.
I've worked with 60-year-olds that describe their first years, and it's like, it's heartbreaking, the patterns that they become comfortable with because of their earliest experiences, their attachment, essentially.
Yeah. Now, what are those attachments, just the broad strokes of the different types of attachments there are.
Yeah. And let me just say that this is language that we have now. God knew that this was going on in the human brain and body and family system from, since he created us.
Since he
from
created,
millennia,
right?
from millennia,
Kind of
right?
knew something about
we,
it.
really in the last 70 years, arguably, finally have language for this. But the attachment, really, there's secure attachment, and then there are three types of insecure attachment. And just to touch on them, secure attachment has to do with when there's a rupture in relationship, knowing that it's going to be fixed, it's going to be repaired.
Yeah.
Knowing that we can depend on people generally, that they're going to be there to meet our needs, especially the ones who we're in closest relationship with. How does this happen? When a parent, sure, gives a child food to eat when he or she's hungry, or sleeps him or her when they're sleepy, or cleans a baby when he or she is dirty. But even more than that, it's when a parent is attuned. It's an important word when we talk about attachment. Attuned and aware of and tuned into, like a radio station, non-verbally, the emotional state of the infant, and responds in such a way that the caregiver helps the infant regulate. Which is just a fancy way to say calm down.
Yeah, self-soothing.
Yeah, self-soothing, exactly. That's a flyover quick version of what secure attachments do.
Yeah.
And just to draw it out, what this means in someone's life is that is the, in general, emotional temperature that you look
default.
for in your relationships. In other words, as a married person, if you are securely attached, when there's conflict, you don't become overly clingy and sort of codependent, nor do you run away and say, I need to cut all ties. There's discomfort, obviously,
Yeah.
but there's not an overwhelming distress in the relational rupture. Why? Because you know that sooner rather than later, it's going to be repaired.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned infants, and I think that's a great, I can't remember exactly where I read this at, but I think it was about attachments, and a study that was done in infants to kind of identify these insecure or secured, attachment styles, right?
Yeah.
Think of like a daycare, right? And you go to drop your child off, and your child has immediate like separation anxiety, or they start crying inconsolably because mom has left the room, right? And then mom comes back into the room, and then the child is still needs to be consoled, but then is consoled quickly and then goes on happy playing with toys again, right? That would be kind of that secure type of attachment. As we're another same situation, but mom drops off child is indifferent, right? Doesn't even recognize that mom has left the room. Mom comes back into the room and child doesn't care. Yeah. Right. And that's a different type of attachment. I can't remember exactly the term. Was it maybe avoidant? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Avoidant, attachment. So, all that to say, we are learning something these days about and giving language to something that God already knew.
Yeah.
Right. And science is just catching up to God's design anyway. But with attachment, that the beginning, our earliest formative years are so important to our future health and the things that we will by default go to, or
the patterns we develop.
Yeah.
What you're describing is this strange situation, and you can find it on YouTube. It was, in the 60s and 70s, Mary Ainsworth was the researcher. She and her team did exactly what you just described and saw how different children responded when their caregiver was there and not there, and then came back.
Yeah. And so, but that's also true for us as children of God.
Very much so.
Right? And so we were talking, and you brought up this notion of a new attachment. I know you didn't come up with this, but I'm sure you'll give credit to where credit's due. But talk to us about this new attachment, especially in a dynamic of family. Yeah. How does this all come together and make sense?
Yeah. Well, very quickly, the three types of insecure attachment are avoidant, what you said as an overgeneralization. This is when our caregiver is not attuned to us and does not respond to our nonverbal emotional needs and doesn't help us regulate. That teaches us later on to just to depend on ourselves, to just go it alone. Relationships are actually kind of scary. The other insecure attachment is ambivalent, which, to overgeneralize, this is when a caregiver was unpredictably attuned or not. There wasn't this pattern or predictable attunement. And so like sometimes that parent was there and sometimes not. And so what happens is we learn actually to read, hey, is mom preoccupied right now? Does she have her own things to do, or is she tuned in? And it's really a role reversal, because the child ends up more attuned to the parent in a given moment, to see if the needs will be met or not. And then finally, the most heartbreaking is disorganized. This is when your base of safety, your caregiver, isn't not just not attuned to your needs, but actually becomes a source of fear because either abuse or neglect. So those are the three insecure attachments, and it's important to recognize. And in fact, Adam Young, he's a counselor, follower of Jesus, and does workshops, and he's got a whole 2 podcasts on attachment and how can we figure out as an adult what our attachment style is, because it's so profound on our entire life. So the place we find ourselves is his podcast, and that's really helpful. But the reason that it's so profound for our experience of and with God is because it was Dallas Willard who first said, once he realized what we were discovering in brain science, that salvation is actually a new attachment. God as Father reprograms our brain, and therefore, because our brain's connected to our body, our biology, and we end up thinking about and responding spontaneously differently the more we press into our relationship with God as Father. We're deeply transformed.
Yeah, and I think that's super huge. I mean, because even attachment language is also found in like couples therapy or marriage counseling,
Yes.
because it has such a profound implication into the way that you relate to one another. When you're insecure about the relationship and you feel like I want to be close, and so you respond from this default attachment style that you have, right? Which may be different from the attachment style that your spouse has. And so it's so profound. But to think that when you come to know Jesus, when you are born again, that's why I wanted to use that quote, that phrase, born again, right? Into a family, the old is gone, the new has come, as scripture tells us, how profound it is for those early stages of discipleship, right? Again, earlier we talked about being reparented by God. Discipleship is being reparented by God. And here we're talking about a new attachment style, that salvation is a new attachment. What does that mean about, for the family that where, one spouse has come to know Jesus, but the other hasn't, right? Or I've seen this so many times in being a youth pastor years ago, where it was actually the student that came to know Jesus and the parents didn't, but through the student, mom and dad come to church, and then the whole family, but something happened, right? Something happened there. Obviously it's the work of God, all glory to him. But there's something about this early discipleship, early, days of discipleship where, and I don't know if this is the right picture, but I think about, I have some friends, they just had a baby not too long ago, just a couple days ago. And they were talking about, and we were there 2 nights before they had the baby, and they were talking about what they were going to do once the baby came. They were asking me and my wife questions, and so we were trying to give them a little bit of pointers of like not to freak out about certain things. But one of the things that they were anticipating was the skin to skin contact with the baby, and how important that was, right? Because it's super important. And even the father was like, like, I'm going to do the same thing, like, skin to skin contact, and hold my child. And it's so important. I think of something like that. So the earliest moment is intentional. I see no difference in God the Father to us. It is intentional.
And it's all over Scripture. So we know, because of brain science, that the face-to-face interaction between a mother and child or father and child. If you smile at a baby, that baby's brain is totally engaged with you. The mirror neurons are smiling back. There's this joyful attachment or connection. And all over Scripture. In fact, it was Jim Wilder, who's a brain scientist and he's a master's in theology. You know, he realized that in Psalm 16, where it says, "In your presence is fullness of joy," the literal translation of the Hebrew of the psalm there is that in your face. In your face is fullness of joy. So the countenance, the face of God looking at us like a caregiver looking at his or her infant, just enjoying one another. That's the fullness of joy. And that is really where we profoundly are transformed.
Yeah. In fact, I was just thinking about this and talking about this at my service, was the idea that one of the emotions that we get to experience is the experience and the feeling of joy when a child is born. Right? There is nothing that I could compare or any way that I could I could not accurately describe the feeling of joy that I had seeing each of my children breathe for the first time.
Yeah.
Holding them in my hands and looking at them and calling their name into them, speaking it in, your name is this. This is why we're naming you this. That's a moment that, like, man, you know, like it even gets me emotional now. It's like, it's so profound. It's unlike nothing else, but it's also reflective of the Creator, right?
Yeah.
The Creator who created us, and he allows us to share this experience, you know, of giving life and naming it.
Yeah.
So profound, right? And it's one of the earliest things, and that makes it so important, right? So understanding this salvation, when you're a new creation in Jesus, the implications that has for your family is amazing, even though we're not there yet.
Yeah, there's no mistake that God reveals himself as Father, Jesus as a brother, and the Holy Spirit as our helper. And that God over and over in the New Testament talks about family. The faith is a family. You know, we're members of one another because we're members of a body, a family together. That's by no mistake. And so, yes, we all come from broken families, but God has some powerful work to do when we're reparented by him and we learn to relate with others in the family of faith.
Yeah.
You know, ultimately, you know, Jesus says, if, you know, you love me more than your father and your mother and your brothers. He says it, you know, positively in some of the Gospels. In Luke, it's negative. If you don't hate your father, mother, and brothers, yeah, more than me. And he obviously doesn't have an ethic of hate. He's just saying in comparison, like, even more than the values and the attitudes and the patterns that you caught from your family, learn them from me. That's the reprogramming and being reparented by God.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing when it comes to like the brokenness in family is again to remember that every family is broken. We're all dealing with things individually, and so when you compound that with a spouse and children who are also dealing with things individually, it can create a dynamic. It exponentially creates this fragmented, right, idea, and where we are broken, in need of restoration, and the only person that can do that is Jesus, who is willing it, and it is his work that is doing it. Learning things like attachment, learning things about like how we grew up, and the things that we've developed, you know, from the earliest parts of our lives is so important. Not to stay there, but to grow, right? Yeah. To grow and to allow God to do that work. And maybe to the families that are listening, maybe there's a mom or dad, or there's a child, maybe a grown child who's thinking about the family they came from and the family they one day want to have. What would you say are some great resources? Any good books that you can think off the top of your head? I know I'm putting you on the spot here. I didn't warn you about that.
Some of my favorite parenting books to kind of relearn some of those patterns are discipline that connects with your child's heart, from this great really husband and wife who are in the game, and also therapists. Their organization is called Connected Families. It's been a great resource.
What was the name of that again?
discipline that connects with your child's heart.
Discipline that connects with your
really
child's heart.
practical ways to actually see the strength that's gone sideways. I think they call it the gift gone awry.
Okay.
In every misbehaving moment, so that you can really call out your and help your kids become the individuals that they've been created to be. Another favorite of my wife and me is it's by Paul David Tripp, 14 Principles that have to do with parenting, gospel parenting, something like that. We'll put it in the show notes. I can't remember. Parenting is maybe what it's called. But those are have been some really helpful resources for us in terms of the way that we even think about what we're bringing to the table as parents.
Yeah. And that's the goal, right? We want to open the door to these things, but this podcast isn't the one-stop shop to like solving it or fixing it or even aligning it. It's more of, we want to bring awareness and kind of open the door to these issues, right? And because we know on the other side of that is where wholeness is. Yeah. So if you're watching this and, this has been good for you, we're glad that you joined the conversation. I want to thank you, Wes, for really giving us some insight into some of these thoughts. But there may be somebody that you're thinking about right now. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's your sister, right? Or brother-in-law or somebody, a friend, a neighbor who might benefit from listening to this episode. Would you share it with them? That would mean the world to us if you would share it with them, and you yourself maybe subscribe to this podcast where we're going to be talking about more things, about anger, conflict, right? So many different things that we're dealing with when it comes to our emotions, and we're trying to bridge the gap between emotional health and spiritual maturity. We'll hope you join us next time. Thanks.